At fencing practice, everyone laughed at the old man. They didn't know who he was. But when he stepped into the arena, the laughter stopped. Subscribe and write in the comments. Where are you watching from? The Le Cheval Blanc Fencing Academy sat quietly at the edge of Austin, a glass and stone monument to discipline and ambition nestled among the long shadows of oak trees and freshly paved driveways. From the outside, it could have passed for a corporate campus, with its high walls, automatic gates, and polished silver logo above the front door, a crossed foil and épée over a charging horse. Inside, the floors gleamed with oil-finished wood. Tall windows let in streams of pale Texas light, illuminating rows of lockers, laminated posters from past competitions, and plaques bearing the names of local prodigies who had gone on to the Nationals. Here, children of doctors, lawyers, and tech moguls trained under strict regimens and pristine uniforms, guided by coaches who had once stood on Olympic podiums. The academy didn't just teach fencing. It curated excellence. It was into this temple of precision that he walked, an old man with a slight limp, a battered duffel bag over one shoulder, and no introduction. The front door opened with a quiet click, and for a moment no one noticed him. The receptionist, a lean college student with a ponytail and AirPods, glanced up, assuming a parent had come in early. She opened her mouth to ask if he was lost, but he was already walking past her, calmly, like he had every right in the world to be there. He wore an oversized gray hoodie with the sleeves pushed to his elbows, old sweatpants that clung unevenly to his calves, and a pair of sneakers that had long since lost their shine. His face was weathered but firm, with a full beard the color of iron and hair pulled back in a neat, low tail. There was no arrogance in his walk, but no uncertainty either. Just presence. He reached the sign-in tablet near the locker rooms, stared at it for a moment, then typed slowly with one finger. Charles N. No last name. No explanation. Coach Holt, the academy's senior instructor, noticed him while adjusting targets on the far wall of the sow. Holt was in his 50s, whip-lean, his body still conditioned to move like a coiled spring. He squinted at the old man, noting the limp, the ancient sneakers, the lack of fencing gear. Behind him, half a dozen students were stretching, warming up for the afternoon session. Holt approached, brushing invisible dust from his tracksuit. "Can I help you?" he asked, polite but curt. The man didn't hesitate. "Just here to train." "With respect," Holt replied, "this is an advanced academy. We don't do drop-ins." Charles met his gaze, and for a split second something flickered in the stillness of his eyes. "I'm not here to impress, just want to move." It was enough, barely. Holt, who prided himself on being open-minded in theory, if not in practice, gave a non-committal grunt. "Fine, you can observe. If you're serious, we'll talk." Charles nodded once and walked to the edge of the mat. That should have been the end of it. But the moment the students caught sight of him, a man easily in his 70s, standing stiffly near the benches in baggy clothes, they began to whisper. It started with Leo, of course. Leo Harding was the academy's rising star, a national-level sabreur with a jawline built for magazine covers and a swagger he wore like cologne. 19, brilliant, arrogant, and beloved. He leaned toward his training partner, a wiry boy named Casey, and gestured toward Charles. "Who brought Gandalf to practice?" he whispered, grinning. Casey snorted. "You think he knows which end of the blade to hold?" Leo chuckled. "Maybe he's here for Tai Chi hour." Their laughter carried farther than they realized. Charles didn't react. He simply observed, standing with his hands loosely clasped behind his back, his eyes scanning the room. Not coldly, not timidly, but like someone trying to remember something distant. When the time came for drills, Holt, perhaps out of curiosity, perhaps from some small instinct, allowed Charles to join. "Just shadow movements," he said brusquely. "Stay at the back. Don't interfere." Charles nodded and took his place at the end of the line. The class began with standard footwork drills: advance lunge, retreat, recover, circle steps. The students moved with sharp confidence, their feet slapping the floor in practiced rhythm. Charles moved too, but off rhythm, wide, imprecise. His steps were half beats behind, his lunges soft and shallow. He led with his shoulders instead of his center. To anyone watching, it looked like a man struggling to remember something he never fully learned. More laughter, this time less subtle. Casey exaggerated a misstep, mimicking Charles. Leo made a point of accidentally bumping into him during a pass. "Sorry, Pops. Didn't see you moving at glacial speed." Still, Charles said nothing. He bowed each time he stepped on or off the mat. He listened attentively when Holt corrected him, nodding without argument. He repeated the same awkward strike over and over, never flinching, never growing impatient. It wasn't what he did that stood out. It was what he didn't do. He didn't watch others for cues. He didn't smirk when others failed. He didn't seem to care that they were watching him, judging him. Only one person didn't laugh. Elise Maury, assistant coach, 26, precise to a fault, with dark eyes that rarely missed a mistake. She watched Charles during each drill, noting with growing unease that his footing, while unorthodox, never wavered, that he never overextended, never lost balance. Even when his strikes appeared sloppy, there was something artificial in his failures, something rehearsed, like an actor playing a role. After 40 minutes, Holt called for a water break. The students broke into chatter and headed for their bottles. Charles stepped off the mat, pulled a faded cloth from his duffel, and gently wiped his forehead. He didn't limp now, not exactly. His gait had changed, deliberate even. Elise approached cautiously. "You holding up okay?" she asked. He looked at her, eyes soft but unreadable. "A bit winded," he said, "but nothing new." "First time here?" she asked, feigning casual interest. He gave a vague shrug. "First class, not the first time with a blade." She paused, hearing the distinction. Before she could ask more, Holt clapped for everyone to line up again. Elise jogged back to the edge of the mat. Charles lingered for a second, then bowed and stepped into the formation's rear. The next segment was partner rotation, light sparring, touch drills only. Charles found himself across from a tall, fast-footed teen named Lucas, who looked at him with barely concealed smirk. "Ready, old man?" Lucas quipped, raising his foil. Charles bowed. "As I'll ever be." The buzzer beeped. They began. Lucas came fast, quick jabs to the shoulder. Charles's response was slow, almost clumsy. He blocked late, missed openings, let his blade wander offline. Watching him was painful, yet something didn't quite add up. His stances, when not moving, were solid. His back was always straight. His feet didn't shuffle or slide. He looked rooted. Elise's brows furrowed. Then, for a brief instant, she saw it. Charles shifted into a stance that hadn't been taught in their curriculum. Lower, tighter, blade angled downward in a way that protected his center and cut off attack lanes. It was a stance from a different era. It lasted only seconds before he returned to the clumsy rhythm, but it stayed with her. After class, the students packed up, buzzing with energy. Leo passed by Charles with a chuckle. "Next time, maybe bring a walker. We'll get you some wheels." Charles just nodded, picked up his bag, and walked toward the locker room. He didn't look back. Elise stayed behind, pretending to check inventory. When she was sure no one was watching, she stepped out through the back door and made her way to the small, forgotten practice court behind the academy, the one no longer used for official lessons. It was surrounded by trees, half lit by a flickering lamppost. She often came here when she needed quiet. Tonight, she wasn't alone. Under the fading glow of the lamp stood Charles. He wore the same hoodie, but the hood was down now, and his sleeves were rolled to his elbows. In his hands, a wooden waster, worn, smooth, balanced. He moved with a fluid purpose, one motion melting into the next. Not flashy, not theatrical, exact, intentional, silent. She hid behind a low hedge and watched. Every step he took matched a breath. Every pivot seemed to flow with the earth, not against it. The waster cut through the air in slow arcs, sometimes sharp, sometimes shallow. His eyes never blinked, his focus never broke. There was no showmanship in his movements, only memory. As if his body remembered something his mind had long buried. She reached for her phone, hesitated, then pressed record. Not to expose, just to remember. When he finished, he bowed, not to an audience, not to a camera, but to the earth itself. Then he stood still. Elise's heart pounded. She turned and walked away quietly, leaving behind the man who had failed every drill but never lost his balance. And she knew, whatever his name was, whatever story he had come to forget, this was no beginner. And he hadn't come here to learn. He had come to remember. The following afternoon, the skies above Austin were thick with late summer haze, the kind that seemed to muffle sound and slow time. Inside the Le Cheval Blanc Academy, the tension felt sharper than usual, though few could have explained why. It was the kind of shift in atmosphere that settled in the corners of the room and lingered under the ribs, unnoticed but undeniable. Some of the students felt it in the stiffness of their shoulders during stretches, others in the silence between their jokes. But the source of it all walked in quietly, as he had the day before. Charles N., with the same weathered bag, the same expressionless calm, and the same quiet nod to the front desk. He didn't speak to anyone. He didn't need to. His very presence, subdued and still, seemed to provoke something in the air. By the time he made his way to the far bench and began slipping on his worn, mismatched fencing gloves, the students had already started whispering. Leo saw him first. The golden boy was leaning against a column, arms crossed, a towel draped around his neck like a fighter between rounds. A grin slid across his face. He turned and walked across the room with the casual swagger of someone preparing to deliver a punchline. "Well, well, look who's back," he said loudly enough for half the class to hear. "Ready for round 2, Master Shuffle Step?" A ripple of laughter ran through the room. Charles didn't even glance up. He was tightening the strap on his glove with methodical care. Leo clucked his tongue. "Hey, I brought you something. Thought you'd appreciate an upgrade." He reached into his bag and pulled out a plastic toy sword, the kind sold in dollar stores around Halloween, silver-painted with glittery runes and a rubber grip. He held it out like a trophy. You know, less strain on the joints. Even more laughter now. A few students pulled out their phones to snap photos, hoping to catch the moment the old man took offense. But Charles simply looked at the toy, blinked once, and said, "Too heavy." The room fell into a brief, stunned silence before erupting again. Leo shook his head with mock admiration. "Man's got jokes. I like it." Coach Holt stepped in then, frowning slightly, but not enough to truly intervene. "That's enough, Leo," he said half-heartedly. "Focus up." Leo grinned and turned away, victorious in his small theater. Elise stood at the far side of the room, arms folded, her expression unreadable. She had stayed up late the night before, rewatching the video she'd recorded from the shadows of the back court. She'd watched it again and again, slow motion in the cuts, the footwork, the stillness between transitions. It wasn't just skill, it was fluency, like a native speaker returning to a language long unsung. She had woken with one thought burning in her mind. Why's he pretending not to know? Now she watched the mockery unfold and bit the inside of her cheek, unsure whether to speak. But Charles didn't seem to mind. He stood, bowed, and joined the warm-up drills. The class began as usual. Footwork, lunges, recovery. This time, Charles looked even clumsier than before. He stumbled over a retreat, hesitated during a beat parry, and once stepped completely out of line formation during a shuffle drill. Holt corrected him with a visible frustration, but Charles only nodded respectfully and tried again, unflustered. To the students, it was confirmation that the old man was a well-meaning joke. Leo made exaggerated groaning noises during Charles's attempts and muttered to Casey, "I swear, my grandpa moves faster, and he's in a wheelchair." The derision was no longer subtle. When sparring pairs were called, Charles was again assigned to Lucas, the fast, careless teen from the previous day. Lucas approached this time with less amusement and more malice. The previous session had made him feel uncertain, though he couldn't quite explain why. Now he was determined to make it clear who was in charge. They squared off, and Charles offered a bow. Lucas didn't return it. He lunged immediately, too hard, too fast, driving the tip of his foil toward Charles's shoulder with the subtlety of a freight train. Charles moved. Not much, just enough. The blade skimmed the air an inch from his chest. Lucas reset and came again. This time he connected, not with a strike, but a shove. Their foils tangled. Charles took a half step back and reset without complaint. "You gonna fight or just dance, old man?" Lucas sneered. Coach Holt raised his voice. "Control, Lucas." Lucas raised his hands in mock surrender. "All good, Coach. I'm just helping him find his center of gravity." Elise watched closely, noting again that Charles never flinched, never overcompensated, never braced. His posture was always relaxed but centered. She had studied fencing biomechanics for years, knew how easy it was to lose balance when startled or rushed. Yet Charles, even when making mistakes, always recovered perfectly. It wasn't clumsiness, it was disguise. And it was deliberate. After practice, Leo made sure the teasing continued. He found an old video from the internet, an elderly man tripping during a martial arts demonstration, and edited Charles's name over it, adding circus music. He uploaded it to the student group chat with the caption, "Le Cheval's new Zen master, enlightenment through falling." It went viral among the academy's students within the hour. Elise said nothing. But that night, she returned to the back court. She wasn't surprised to find him there again, under the same flickering lamplight, moving as if choreographing with the wind. His waster sliced through the air in wide, invisible arcs. His breath matched his steps. There was a reverence to it, something spiritual. It wasn't for exercise. It wasn't even practice. It was remembrance. This time, Elise recorded the entire sequence, 4.5 minutes of disciplined, seamless motion. She didn't post it under her name. She didn't tag the academy, just a caption. "I thought he was just an old man. But this is a weapon remembering itself." She went to bed with a restless heart. The video exploded overnight. Tens of thousands of views. Comments flooding in. "That center control? Not a hobbyist. Moves like old school kenjutsu. This ain't a random. This is muscle memory you earn in blood." And then one comment stood out above the rest. "Yo, is that Is that Chuck Norris?" Elise stared at the screen, blood pulsing in her temples. She hadn't dared to name him. She hadn't wanted to believe it was possible. But now, someone else said it, and it slotted into place like a lock clicking shut. The next day, at the academy, the whispering wasn't about Charles anymore. It was about the video. Students passed phones under their arms, pretending to scroll homework but clearly watching him. Holt seemed oblivious, or perhaps pretended to be. Only Leo remained smugly unaffected, because Leo had a plan. That afternoon, after the session ended, he walked into the administrator's office with a proposal: a weekend demonstration match, an open house event for donors and local families, with sparring exhibitions, refreshments, press, and as a closing act, Leo versus Charles. "A little intergenerational fun," he pitched. "You know, for engagement. He seems cool with it. Why not let him shine?" Elise, who overheard the conversation, felt something in her stomach twist. Later that night, an official poster appeared on the bulletin board in the hallway, printed on glossy paper in red and gold: "Open Sparring Exhibition. This Saturday at 6 p.m., final match, Leo Hardin versus Charles N." Someone had scrawled below it in Sharpie, "Bring your popcorn, the beard goes down." No one took it seriously. No one except Elise. Because she had seen the truth beneath the mask, and she knew, if Leo truly believed this would be a showcase of dominance, he hadn't just misjudged Charles. He had woken something that should have been left alone. The day of the exhibition arrived cloaked in the kind of golden haze that made the city feel theatrical. Even before noon, the parking lot of Le Cheval Blanc Academy buzzed with visitors. Folding chairs were being arranged by eager volunteers, and the foyer smelled faintly of catered pastries and fresh coffee. A banner hung above the entryway, white letters on a crimson background, bold and unmissable. Community Open House. Demonstrations, engagement, excellence. Inside, the salle had been transformed. Rows of seats lined the perimeter of the main mat, and paper lanterns swayed from the rafters. The wooden floor had been polished to a mirror sheen. Elise stood near the water cooler, watching the flurry of activity. She could see the cluster of parents near the coffee table, chatting amiably, their children racing between chairs. Staff members buzzed about, pinning name tags to blazers and fixing collars on uniformed students. The energy in the room was unmistakable: excitement, amusement, the expectation of harmless entertainment. It unsettled her. She hadn't seen Charles all day. Not in the parking lot, not near the changing rooms. She had checked the locker room 3 times. The peg with his name still hung undisturbed, the borrowed fencing jacket still folded beneath it. She kept glancing toward the door, hoping against reason he would walk in, adjusting his belt as always, perhaps a little late, perhaps a little stiff, but as present and solid as ever. He didn't. And yet, 10 minutes before the final match, as if summoned by something deeper than invitation, he stepped into the salle. There was no announcement, no entrance music. He simply appeared, walking softly on the balls of his feet, a duffel bag slung over one shoulder. He wore the same black hoodie and weathered fencing hakama that had drawn so much mockery before. But this time, something about him felt stiller, more centered. He moved like a man who had already made peace with the outcome. Conversations quieted as he passed through the crowd. No one cheered. No one clapped. Yet heads turned, attention following him like iron filings to a magnet. He bowed to the gathered audience, a small, almost imperceptible nod, and set his bag beside the mat. Leo was already there, of course, dressed in a spotless white uniform, his custom foil glinting under the gym lights, his stance loose and cocky. He made a show of waving to the audience, exchanging high fives with a few younger students, flexing for someone's camera. When Charles stepped onto the mat, Leo raised his eyebrows theatrically. He looked him up and down and grinned. "Didn't think you'd actually show," he said, voice amplified just enough to carry. "Figured you'd be home soaking your knees by now." Charles said nothing. Leo turned to the audience, one hand shielding his mouth like he was telling a secret. "Seriously, though, give the man a hand. Takes guts to step into the ring when your AIRP card's still warm." Laughter scattered across the seats. Even a few of the instructors chuckled. Elise didn't. She stood frozen, arms crossed, watching every twitch in Charles's posture. He didn't flinch, didn't frown, didn't posture. He simply bowed, deeply, deliberately, to the mat, then to Leo. Then he stood upright, feet shoulder-width apart, arms at his sides. The referee gave the usual instructions, then raised his hand. "Begin." Leo moved fast. He always did. His footwork was sharp, rehearsed, nearly flawless. His foil lashed out in a sudden, stabbing thrust aimed straight at Charles's head. Charles didn't move. Not at first. The foil stopped an inch short of his forehead. Leo pulled back, surprised. He had expected a parry, a stumble, at least a flinch. Nothing. He reset, grinning now. The crowd chuckled, unsure whether to laugh or be impressed. Leo attacked again, faster this time. A combination: head, side, shoulder, classic sequence. His blade snapped and curled with the practiced precision. Charles stepped aside, barely. Each strike missed not because he blocked, but because he wasn't there anymore. He had shifted before the attack fully landed, his body moving with the ease of a door swinging shut on silent hinges. By the fourth exchange, the room had gone quiet. There was no contact, no score, just motion. Leo attacked, Charles flowed. It was not defense, it was absence. He moved like smoke, like shadow. Every time Leo struck, he met nothing but air. Leo's grin began to tighten. His breath came harder. His moves grew louder, more forceful, less clean. Sweat appeared on his brow. He missed again, overextended, stumbled slightly. A murmur passed through the crowd. Charles stood still, his weapon untouched, his breathing unchanged. Elise's heart thudded against her ribs. She felt the tension in her chest rise, 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 like something ancient waking up just below her skin. Leo roared, not a battle cry, an embarrassed animal growl, a noise made not to scare but to shake off fear. He lunged, high and fast, his blade aimed for Charles's temple. In that instant, for the first time since the match began, Charles moved with intent. He stepped forward, not back, turned, pivoted, and his Bakken rose in a smooth, blinding arc. There was a crack. Not loud, but final. Leo's foil spun from his hands, tumbling across the mat and skidding to a halt near the spectator's feet. He staggered forward, off balance, arms flailing to keep from falling. Charles stood with his wooden blade angled downward, motionless. The silence that followed was absolute. One of the children near the front whispered, "Whoa." A mother dropped her phone. The referee blinked, uncertain whether the match had ended or even begun. Charles slowly lowered his weapon, then bowed. Leo remained frozen for a moment, chest heaving. Then, jaw clenched, he walked to retrieve his foil. Into the microphone he muttered, "Lucky block, beginner's luck." No one laughed. Even the youngest students knew better. As the crowd dispersed, slowly, uncertainly, Charles gathered his things. He bowed once more to the mat, then to the room, and turned to leave. He didn't linger. He didn't accept congratulations. He didn't speak. But before he could vanish into the hallway, Holt caught up with him. "You've been holding back," Holt said, voice low, no smile on his face. Charles adjusted the strap on his bag. "I came to train, not to compete." "Where'd you learn that footwork?" Holt asked. His tone wasn't dismissive now. It was hushed, like awe. Charles met his gaze for the first time. Saito Sensei, 1983. Holt stared. That name, that year, that lineage. "The Tanaka line," he said, more a breath than a statement. Charles nodded once. "Before the school closed." There was a pause. Something in Holt's expression shifted. Not confusion, not resistance. Something like respect, unfamiliar and heavy. Elise waited outside the building, helmet by her hip, leaning against her bike. The street was quiet. Her mind was full. When Charles emerged, his step slow and even, she pushed off the wall and walked toward him. "You okay?" she asked softly. He looked up at the stars. His eyes didn't reflect pride or triumph, just peace. "Better than I've been in a long time." He walked away, duffel over one shoulder, his back straight, like he had never been there at all. And Elise understood. The lesson tonight wasn't for the students. It was for the teachers. By Monday, the exhilaration had faded, replaced by something quieter and more difficult to name. The academy, still echoing from the ripple of whispers and wide-eyed glances that had followed the exhibition, now seemed to hold its breath. The fluorescent lights hummed as they always had, and the waxed floor still shone with meticulous polish, but the air felt different. Something invisible had been left behind in the wake of Charles's departure, something unspoken but deeply present. Morning classes resumed as usual. Coach Holt barked instructions during warm-ups, counting off footwork drills with sharp, clipped syllables. The students obeyed without delay, but there was a subtle edge missing in their movements. Elise noticed it immediately. No one said anything aloud, but the rhythm was off, like a song they used to play by heart had suddenly changed keys without warning. At the far end of the room, near the bench by the windows, a single peg on the locker wall stood empty. Charles's nameplate still hung above it, slightly askew. His fencing jacket, folded carefully the day before, was gone. No one spoke of him. No jokes from Leo, no mocking whispers from Casey, no snide remarks passed between pairs. Leo, in particular, had grown strangely quiet. He arrived early to practice that morning, earlier than even Elise. She had passed him in the corridor, head down, earbuds out, his foil case in one hand and a water bottle in the other. He didn't make eye contact. He didn't speak to anyone. During drills, he followed instructions without a word, sweat pouring down his face long before the others had even broken stride. Whatever bravado he had carried into the exhibition had vanished like mist under heat. Elise knew why. Everyone did. They just didn't have the words for it. That night, she stayed late after class. Most of the students had already left, their voices fading down the corridor. Coach Holt gave her a tired nod before stepping into his office, the door swinging shut behind him. Alone now, she found herself walking toward the back locker room, her feet slow, almost uncertain. She stood before the peg where his gear had once rested. It looked so ordinary, just a nameplate, a hook, nothing more. But she stared at it for a long time as if expecting it to speak, as if it might reveal some secret about who he was and why he had come. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She hesitated, then pulled it out. A notification from TikTok. Her video, the one she'd recorded from the shadows of the back court, had passed 2.4 million views. Her heart pounded as she opened the app. The comment section had exploded. "That's not a beginner. That's years of kata. He moves like an old samurai ghost remembering who he was. Yo, that's Chuck Norris, I'd bet my life. Why would someone like that be at a public dojo? He's not showing off. He's remembering something." Elise scrolled, breath caught in her throat. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't asked for it. The world had found her little window into a mystery and yanked it wide open. And now it couldn't be shut again. A new notification appeared, a private message. No profile picture, no name, just a message. "Thank you for not tagging the location. That kata, it belonged to someone else once. It was never meant for show." She stared at the screen. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. Before she could respond, a second message appeared. "Goodbye." The account vanished before she could reply. She sat there for a long time, staring at the phone in her palm. Then she slid it into her jacket pocket, stood up, and turned back to the lockers. And saw it. A case, leaning against her own locker, where there had been nothing moments before. It was slim, dark, made of a polished wood-grain composite. No tags, no stickers, nothing to mark it, except a single symbol carved near the handle in deliberate, slanted kanji. Loyalty. Her heart climbed into her throat. She dropped to her knees without thinking and opened it. Inside, wrapped in a soft linen cloth, lay a bokken. Not a cheap practice sword, not a decorative piece. This was something else. The wood was smooth, dark, perfectly balanced. The hilt was wrapped in red silk, knotted with expert care, tight but unornamented. The blade had weight, but not heft. It felt alive in her hands, like it was meant to be there. Beneath it, folded with precision, lay a note written in neat, deliberate cursive. Sophia. Thank you for watching without judgment. That kata, the one I practiced in the park, Saito-sensei taught it to me when I had forgotten who I was. He said it was not just a form, but a memory, a thread connecting us to those who came before. You were the only one who saw it for what it was. Don't follow my path. Find your own. But if you ever need it, this bokken will remember. Her hands trembled. The room around her faded. The lights, the walls, the sounds, all dulled. She read the note again, then placed it back in the case, folded the linen over the bokken, and closed it gently. She remained kneeling for a long time, the wooden floor cold beneath her knees, the silence around her no longer empty, but full of something sacred. That evening, during advanced class, she brought the case with her. No one asked about it. No one dared. As she stepped onto the mat, the red silk wrapped tightly around her wrist, her movements were different. Not faster, not more aggressive, but full of weight, full of meaning. Her cuts were precise, not for performance, but for presence. Her footwork matched the beat of a rhythm she had only recently begun to understand. Her balance was no longer studied, it was natural. Coach Holt noticed first. By the middle of the lesson, he had paused the group drills to observe her alone. Again, he said quietly, from the beginning. She began to move. The class fell silent. Every transition was clean. Every breath aligned with her steps. Her strikes carved invisible arcs through the air, not harsh or violent, but intentional. Her blade didn't cut to dominate, it moved to remember. When she finished, there was no applause, only stillness. Holt walked to her slowly, his face unreadable. Then, with more gravity than she had ever seen in him, he bowed. "Keep training," he said, "no matter who's watching." From that day forward, the dojo was never quite the same. No one ever took Charles's place at the far end of the line. Even when students paired off, they skipped that spot. It wasn't discussed, it just remained. Some of the students had seen the video and whispered theories in the locker room. Trevor tried to joke once, what if that really was Chuck Norris? But Dylan just looked down and said, "I don't think that's funny anymore." And no one laughed. The silence that followed meant more than any confirmation ever could. Elise came to class earlier now, stayed later, not because she hoped he would return, but because she knew he wouldn't. And that made it hers. She had been given something, not a gift, but a responsibility. She brought the Balkan with her every day. She never flaunted it, never boasted, but it was always there, red silk glinting when it caught the light. No instructor commented on it. They didn't have to. They saw the way she moved now, with care, with reverence, with memory. One evening, during a paired kata exercise, her movements became so crisp, so present, that Holt stopped the class entirely. "Watch her," he said. "Don't copy, just watch." She repeated the sequence again. Not from performance, not from pride, but from something deeper. A pulse, quiet and ancient, carried through her feet, her hands, her breath. When she finished, the class remained still. Holt approached, bowed deeper than before, and said, "You saw what the rest of us missed. You learned without being taught." She didn't respond. She only bowed. Later, while folding her hakama in the corner, she glanced towards the shadowed spot where Charles had always stood. It was empty, but not unoccupied. She could feel it now, the trace of something invisible and lasting, like the echo of a final chord still vibrating beneath the silence. Outside, the night was cool. The wind brushed through the trees with gentle persistence. She strapped the Balkan across her back, tightened the red silk around her wrist, and mounted her bike. She didn't know where his path had taken him, whether he would ever return. But she knew one thing: he had not come to teach. He had come to remember. And through that, he had shown her how to move forward. It had been 3 weeks since Charles had disappeared, and though no one said his name aloud, he was everywhere. The academy carried his absence like a heartbeat under the floorboards, constant, unseen, undeniable. His nameplate still hung at the edge of the locker row, untouched. That corner of the sow, the one he had once quietly occupied during warm-ups, had become sacred. Even the most oblivious of the students instinctively avoided placing their bags there, as though their bodies understood what their minds still refused to articulate. Something had happened here, and no one would ever fill that space again. Elise came in before dawn now, long before the first students arrived, and stayed until the last echo of movement faded into the walls. She swept the floor slowly, even when it didn't need sweeping. She adjusted the alignment of the mats even when they hadn't shifted. She stood at the far end of the room and stared at the place where Charles had once stood and trained, not because she expected to see him there, but because that emptiness had begun to feel like something she had to protect. Her training had changed. She no longer measured her progress by speed or technique. What she pursued now was harder to define. Presence, perhaps. Stillness. The discipline of intention. When she practiced with the Balkan, she did so not to perform, but to remember. Every movement was a quiet act of preservation. The red silk he had left her remained wrapped around the hilt, faded now in places from sweat and repetition, but still tight. Her wrists bore the marks of long sessions, but she didn't notice them anymore. The students, too, had changed. They no longer joked as loudly. They bowed more deeply, Their footwork, once energetic and erratic, had become quieter, more precise. It was not out of fear, but reverence. The lesson Charles had left behind had not been explained, but it had been received. Even Leo, perhaps especially Leo, had transformed. He no longer arrived late, nor did he boast or mock. He trained harder than anyone else now, eyes downcast, lips pressed together as if chasing something he had once dismissed. He spoke little. When paired with younger students, he corrected them with surprising patience. The change was so complete, so absolute, that no one dared point it out. To do so would risk acknowledging the source. Elise noticed that Coach Holt had grown quieter too. He no longer barked corrections so quickly. He observed more, spoke less. Sometimes he would watch a student's stance for long minutes before offering only a nod. Something about the air had changed him. The dojo had slowed, not in energy but in tempo, like a piece of music rediscovered and played in the key it was meant to be heard. And still, no one filled the space where Charles had once stood. It wasn't discussed. But during every class, every rotation, that corner remained open. One gray afternoon, as rain ticked softly against the tall windows and the sky hung low with fog, Elise found herself alone in the salle after hours. The lights were dim, the scent of wood polish and sweat lingering like memory. She opened the slim case by her locker, lifted the bokken, and stepped onto the mat. She didn't speak. She didn't warm up. She simply stood there, letting the silence settle. Then she moved. It began with the breath. Inhale, step forward, shift, cut, every motion deliberate, flowing from the last. She wasn't trying to replicate the sequence Charles had shown her in the park. She had practiced that for weeks now. What she did instead was listen, not to noise, but to the echo of movement in her body, in her memory, in the stillness of the room. She imagined his presence, not as a ghost or mentor, but as a shadow cast by her own conviction. The cuts came faster now, the transitions sharper. She pivoted, turned, lowered into a stance that came not from diagrams or drills, but from instinct born of long observation. She was halfway through the sequence when she realized Holt had entered. He didn't speak. He stood by the doorway, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. She continued. She couldn't have stopped even if she'd wanted to. Her feet glided, her wrists carved precise arcs through the air. The bokken whistled softly in the silence. When she finished, she turned slowly and bowed. Holt walked to the center of the mat and stopped in front of her. For a long time he said nothing. Then, quietly, he asked, "Where did you learn that?" Elise looked him in the eye. "I didn't." His gaze flicked downward to the bokken, then back to her. "You saw what the rest of us missed," he said. "He wasn't here to teach, but you listened anyway." She nodded. He stepped back and bowed, not the casual instructor's dip of acknowledgement, but a full, formal bow. She returned it without hesitation. Wordless understanding passed between them. The dojo shifted again. In the weeks that followed, Elise began to take on more responsibility. Holt asked her to lead warm-ups, to correct forms, to help teach kata to the younger students. She never claimed authority. She simply moved with it. The other students responded without complaint. There was something in her quiet that demanded attention, not the loud kind, the real kind. And still, every class, the spot where Charles had trained remained untouched. Late one evening, after the last student had gone and the janitor's cart echoed in the back hallway, Elise sat on the bench by the windows, watching the rain bead against the glass. The lights were low. Her gear was folded beside her. She thought of him, not the man himself, but the way he had stood, the way he had bowed, the way he had moved, not to win, not to impress, but to remember. Her hand reached into her bag and withdrew a folded scrap of linen. She unwrapped it gently, revealing the note he had left her. She read it again, not because she had forgotten the words, but because reading it brought her closer to the heartbeat beneath them. This Bakken will remember. She smiled faintly. The academy was quiet now, but it didn't feel empty. She stood, tightened the silk around her wrist, and walked toward the center of the mat. She would move, and in doing so, she would carry what had been left behind, not as a student repeating someone else's form, but as a person stepping into her own. Outside, the rain continued to fall. A breeze slipped through the narrow window panes, cold and clean. The world had moved on, but here, on this floor, under this light, with this wooden blade in hand, something remained. Not a name, not a legend, not even a man, but the rhythm of someone who had come silently to pass something on, and someone who had been ready to receive it. As she raised the Bakken, the silk trailing like a whisper from her wrist, Elise no longer wondered whether he would ever return. She knew he wouldn't. He didn't need to. He had left enough behind. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe for more. Watch the next video to see where the journey leads, and share this with someone who needs to feel it too.